Welcome to KidBank Development Season 1, Episode 1. This was my first live Twitch broadcast, so it went pretty well, I think. And here it is. Okay, so the application is running. Let's take a look at it. So I've got that open up in Chrome. And so this is the basic application. Yes, I know it's not pretty. And it doesn't even have a name on it, which I guess I should probably put something together as some kind of picture at the top. But anyway, what it's showing is the current balance is $0. It's showing the transactions right now. There have been no transactions, and here is the form for making a deposit. So we can say, let's deposit $12.25, and we can say that came from bottle return, and we can click deposit. So now we see the transaction for that deposit, and we can see the balance reflects that deposit. The date defaults to the current date. Yesterday we found out that the browser default value requires, so that's this thing down here, requires a very specific format. So apparently it's 4-digit year with a dash, not a slash, but a dash, and then 2 digits for the month, 2 digits for the day, which was pretty annoying to figure out why it was not showing the correct default date. But we can use and say, oh, we forgot that there was a $100 gift that he got, and so now we can add that back. Currently, the transactions are sorted in reverse chronological order. In other words, the most recent one is on the top. And so we see that the balance is currently the sum of the amounts. We'll have to get to formatting. I don't know if I'm going to get to that today. What's up in our stories? Let's go back to our stories. So we have view balance. So we saw that when we started the app, it shows $0. We show that we could deposit. Sort of embedded in the view transactions was really expanding the form so that we can have in addition to the amount, also the date specified and where it came from. You'll notice that under action, it always says a deposit because that is added automatically, and we can look at when we look at the code, we'll see where that's done. So the next story is probably going to be spend money, even though I don't currently have the application saving the transactions anywhere. Let's see. And so I'd like to be able to import the data that I currently have, which is actually right now that information is stored in an Excel spreadsheet. So I'd like to actually eventually get to import that. Funny that I actually don't have a story for doing persistence. So let's go ahead and add a card for persist transactions. We'll figure out how we're going to persist those because there's a number of different ways that I want to do that. All right. So let's switch back to here. And so let's take a look at where we are. So I think what we're going to, did I decide on a story? No, I didn't. All right, so let's go and we'll do spend money. So currently we have sort of a unified display here in that in addition to showing that there's basically a single page showing the balance, showing the list of transactions here, and then basically having a form for doing a deposit here. We could keep going this way and basically add another form that is for buying something. So as much as I would maybe prefer my son to only deposit money, eventually he's going to want to buy stuff. So we could make another form that is basically spend. We could do that on the same page and keep going that way, or we could create a new a new template that's just for paying. Since the page isn't terribly crowded just yet, let's just stick another form on the page. And we'll worry about splitting stuff out when we get to making things prettier. So let's make a form. And since we're using time leaf, our action is sort of just a placeholder. So what we really want to do is, this is going to be for spend. That's what we'll call it. The action is going to go to the spend URL, and the method is going to be a post. So we'll do the same thing. We'll have a field set, because that's currently the way the other form is formatted. We'll create a legend that says spend money. And what are we going to need in order to spend? So probably the same thing. We'll need a date and the amount as well. So we can just copy those. And the last thing is basically what did he spend his money on? So we call this source for when it was a deposit. And so now we want to... Hey, thanks for joining. The priority that I'm ordering the stories in is, since this application is basically for me, is how quickly can I get to the minimal usable, what you might call minimal viable product. And for me, I need to be able to deposit, so I've got that. And while I could say that maybe I don't want him to spend money, I need to have him spend money. So if we look at the other stories, making it prettier, probably I'll split this out and have it so that, is it usable on a phone? That's the minimum that I need. Calculating interest, since I can always backfill that, that I can do later. And yes, I want to get it out of, like, my priority is to get the current stuff out of a spreadsheet and onto something that I no longer have to have on a spreadsheet. Because his mom would like to be able to access this too, and currently I am the holder of the spreadsheet. So yeah, good question. And the rest of the stuff about notifications and categorizing stuff, that's all nice to have, but sort of the spend money and probably persistence, I'll probably need to bump that up, because somewhere I'm going to need to store that. Otherwise, the last thing I want to do is lose information. So we were looking at adding the spend money part of the form. So for the deposit, we called it source. Not quite sure what I'm going to call what he's going to spend money on. I'll use the sort of banal, boring term description until I can come up with something better. So if anybody has a better idea, just throw it in the chat. So this is going to be just another text field. So there's going to be a field. And since we're reading off an object, we're going to use the star symbol for time leaf. And the type is text. And close that. Okay, so now if we look at the page again, oh, what did I do? I bet I know what this is. So my guess is, because I'm referencing an object here, the th object spend, I created the template, but I did not actually do anything inside Spring to load up the model. What I can do, which is one of the great things about using time leaf, is I can do a preview. So let's do a preview of the form. Okay, so the preview looks good. Well, okay, I need a button here. So let's put that in. I always seem to forget the button. So let's go ahead and we'll call this spend. Okay, so now we've got a spend button. I may not be worrying too much about making it pretty, but at least let me put in some white space here. And maybe a little more. Yes, I know I could put in some styles, but I'm not going to do that right now. Okay, that's good enough. The font is really bugging me. The default font, if you don't specify anything, is really bugging me, but I'm going to leave it as is because I don't want to go down that rat hole. All right, so kind of expected the page to break, or at least I should have expected that. So let's at least get the page to not break. So we'll go into our account controller because that's where we're loading up the initial view. So that's here. Currently, it's putting the balance in and a deposit command. So we'll need, and the transaction. So we're going to need a sort of similar thing to the deposit command to support the spend part. Let me reorder this a bit so it can sort of match sort of how the page is laid out. So we've got our balance, we've got our transactions, we've got a deposit command, and so we're going to basically make a spend command. So I'll call it spend command. So whereas for deposit command I had a nice creation method, for spend command I don't know yet what I'm going to need, so I'm just going to use the standard constructor and attribute, and I hope I call it spend. Whoops, close that. And now I'll go and create the class. So it's going to be pretty similar to, as I mentioned, to the deposit command. So there's going to be a string representing the date. So spend command, so let's take actually a quick look at the deposit command. So the deposit command, one of the things we're doing is we're using Lombok so that we don't have to constantly generate setters and getters and constructors. So data handles all of that, generating getters and setters and toString and equals and so on. Since deposit command as well as spend command are basically data transfer objects, everything is, I pretty much like to keep everything as just string and then rely on methods to do conversion appropriately. So here we have data amount source and some methods to convert the amount and date appropriately. Since I'm probably going to have some stuff in common in terms of the date, I might want to create either move the transformation out of here or do something else like have a base command object. I'd like to avoid having a hierarchy here, but I'll keep this as, so I'll probably just move this out to some transformers, but we'll see where that goes. So we've got our date, we've got our amount, and we've got our description. And so the setters and getters are going to be generated by Lombok, so it would help if I put in the Lombok tag here. And what else do we need? So we've got our spend command, we've got our spend. And so we'll rebuild. I should restart the application. Yeah, I tend to, my way of looking at object-oriented stuff is I tend to almost be perhaps pathologically avoiding hierarchies, but it may be okay for having the commands to have a base class that handles the date stuff. But I tend to like to put the transformer stuff into a separate place. It's but usually it starts out on the DTO. So let's see. So let's see if this fixes it. All right, so that fixed it. So that's sort of just enough. So I'm going to do a commit. Whenever I get stuff to work, I like to do commits. So basically, we've prepped for adding spend functionality. So added new spend form section and created the spend command DTO. All right, I'll commit that. Okay, so the way I approach developing this is if I was sort of doing pure automated tests for everything, I might have written like a Selenium test to see that this worked, but that's more overhead than I actually want. But now that I have sort of the outermost parts of the application done sort of from the UI, now we're going to take a level inward and say, okay, what do we need from the controller that to be able to do? So if we look at the controller, which we are in, I'm trying to jump to it, and it's right there. We have a method here to handle the deposit. So what we want to do is we're basically going to have something similar for spend. So let's go ahead and look at our account controller test. Currently there's only one test here, and it's testing the deposit command. So we'll go ahead and create a test for spend command should reduce amount in account. So we'll create a spend command, .new, .var. Those are the fancy postfix stuff. Oh, you saw the streams. Yeah, that's second nature to me now, since I've been teaching that a lot. It's kind of surprising that, like, or maybe it's not surprising, since I've worked in enterprise software development, that it's taken so long for people to start really using Java 8 and functional stuff and lambdas. And I think if you've been using, I've been doing Java for 20 years, so if you've been using Java for a while, it can take a little while to break the old habits and form the new ones. So let's see. So we'll create a spend command. Our spend command, we can set the amount, and we'll spend $34.79. One thing you'll notice if you ever look at my test code, you'll see I never use this. I try not to use the same hard-coded strings, whether they're dates or numeric amounts. So that way, when a test breaks, it's that much easier to differentiate between two different things that might be broken. So if I recognize a number, it's like, where did that number come from? It sometimes helps me track down the source of a problem. All right, so we've got our spend command. We'll go ahead and create a new account. So new var and account controller, new account var. No, not view balance, var. There we go. And then we'll so we haven't spent the money yet, so let's go create a spend command that takes a spend command. And what we want to assert is that, well, if we're spending $34.79, yes, we do not have any validation yet. I am not concerned about that at this point. But we do believe that the balance should be equal to minus $34.79. So one thing you might have realized is that account, if we go to account, is that the balance is currently stored in actually two different ways, but basically we are storing it as scaled integers, sorry, as a scaled decimal in an integer. So if it's 1,000, right, or if it's, go back to here, right, so that way $12.34 is stored as 1, 2, 3, 4, and so 3479 is stored as negative 3479. No, he does not get to overdraft his account. He will not have credit. But if somebody, yeah, that's I don't think I'm going to go there. So okay, so we got our spend. This is what we expect. We'll go ahead and create that method. Since this is going to eventually be returning the name of, it's going to basically do a redirect, so we can stick that in there. We're not checking the return value anyway, but we know we'll need that. We may as well put in a post mapping for that. And that's going to be on spend. Oops. Okay, that all looks good. So now I'll just run this test by itself. And it fails as expected because the spend command doesn't do anything. So actual is 0, which is what we'd expect. So it fails for the right reason. So yay for failing for the right reason. Okay, so now we'll go into spend. I'm going to move this up to be over here near the deposit. So yeah, so we're going to need to extract something similar to the way we did the deposit. And so now we have to decide where to put this method that turns a string. So this decimal to pennies method. It's currently a static method. So now I got to think about where I want to put this. Since it's static, I can put it anywhere. I also have a knee-jerk negative reaction to anything like that would have utilities. But I'm fine with centralizing it into something. Let's see. So if I move this, actually before I do that, I just want to make sure all my unit tests pass. So let's do that. Okay, all except for the one that we actually just created, so that's cool. So let's move this into scaled decimals. So move that. So that means if we move it to something that's named like that, then the method will be decimal to pennies. Well, not happy with the name, but we'll go for it for now. Otherwise, I've been known to spend half an hour trying to figure out a good name, and that would be pretty boring. All right, so we've moved that there. Why did you not import that? Did I move it to the wrong place? Oh, that was weird. Somehow it didn't get into the right package. So let's do that. Okay. That was weird. So amount in cents uses scaled decimals, decimal to pennies. Yeah, I'm not happy with the name, but good enough for now. So now that I move the static method, though, this amount in cents does look like I could put it in the base class for a command object. I'm going to copy it for now and see how I feel about it after we use it. So here we'll do this. So we've got amount in cents. So So if we go back to our controller, first thing we want to do is get the spending amount. And then, so we don't have a withdraw command, that's fine. So we will, do I want to use withdraw or spend? So for my domain, let's see, for this kind of domain, if it were a pure bank account, I'd probably do withdraw. But sort of with a domain-driven, ubiquitous language, spend is the term we use, so we'll say spend. And for now, we'll need a date time. We'll need the spent amount? Spending amount? Spend amount? Names are hard. I'll call it spend amount. And then the spend command, its description. Okay, so date time, we need to do the same thing, do the conversion. And this is spend command. So we'll have to do the same thing as we do here, which uses to local date time, which uses these two static methods. Well, actually uses this static method. So I could do the same thing what I did with scale decimals and move it to another place. So let's take a look at my tests. I've got deposit command test. So this would actually go elsewhere. Well, let me get the tests that I currently have in progress working, and then I'll worry about refactoring. So let's go to spend command. Oops, let's go to deposit command. Yeah, I think I'm going to move it to date formatting for now. And I might decide after I refactor to maybe pull it into that it just belongs in a base command class. So let's see. So I'll need the formatter, need the local date time, and that goes in main Java. Yeah. Yes. That's weird because I know I told it to put it in that package and it keeps moving it elsewhere. So I'm not sure why it keeps doing that. Okay, so deposit command now uses date formatting to do the local date. And so now if we go back to spend command, actually account controller, we can now create this method, and it's basically date formatting to local date time, and then pull in the date that we got from the browser. Okay, so now we have all the stuff we need, and we can go spend. Okay, and so I'm going to keep this blank because my goal was just to get this to compile so that our test will still fail, but there's a higher level test, and I want to then get down to testing account directly. That's interesting. So we're spending the date as local time. Oh yeah, so here, yeah, so that's why we had create with today date to set up a nice default so that when it parses it, when we create it, that it already has a date with it. Boy, this is really a reason to put this into a base class, isn't it? And then this would go in the constructor. I could have just generalized this deposit command totally, because now I've got like real duplication between the send and the deposit. And I could have just called this transaction command. Because right now they have the same 3 fields. If we look at our form, this name is different, but otherwise they're exactly the same. All right, so let's do that, because these really, really, really are the same. So, all right, so let's just get rid of this. Yes, that's fine. So what are those usages and then test? Yeah, that's fine. Just do it. Okay, so now we'll go back to our controller. So let's go ahead and rename this a transaction command. Guess we'll rename that test. And keep this variable. We'll keep that variable. We'll keep that variable. And we'll change that variable. Okay, so we've got our transaction command, deposit command. Otherwise, everything is fine. So here now we're going to basically just use transaction command, and probably want to, since I'm now reusing this in 2 places, get source is kind of weird from the spend point of view. So I will generalize it to description. Oh, that was interesting. So since Lombok is generating the getter doesn't actually exist in the code. There's no, if I try to jump to it, it's not really here because Lombok is generating it from this name. So I can't actually just rename the getter. I would have to rename the property. So I'm just going to call it that boring description. So what happens if I try to do that? So that looks okay. That looks fine. My test is going to be weird. All right, I'll come back and fix that. And on my HTML page, this is not going to be source. This is going to be description. Okay, back to account controller. So basically, we'll create another transaction command. And we may as well do the same thing, basically create with today date. Pre-fill the today's date into the form. But it'll now be under it'll now be in the model under a different name. So we have two different transaction commands, one being used for deposit and one being used for spend. And now really the only difference is, so here, we'll see, we might be able to refactor this, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. So here we're doing an account deposit with basically the transaction. Here we're doing an account spend with the same thing. So now we're down to here inside of our account. So now let's go ahead and write a test for this. Oops. That was weird. Let's go here. Okay, so this is now a transaction command. And so let's go ahead and oops, run all these tests. Yes, the idea of Lombok is that you would never be overriding. So the question was about, could I override and have my own get set methods for some of the variables? In that case, I wouldn't use the Lombok. And I think, I mean, I haven't done it. I think in Lombok you can do it on a per property basis, and so it'll only generate getters and setters for those properties, and then you're on your own for implementing others. But the way I look at these kinds of things, this is just a bunch of data. I mean, if Java had a data class, this is what it would look like, and I wouldn't be having overriding of getters and setters. Okay, so that test failed, and it's still failing because why? Why is this test still failing? Because here in this test where I did create with today date, so it fills in the date with something. Here the problem is it's trying to parse the date, but the date is actually null. So let's go ahead and do the same thing. Transaction command, create today date. And now it should fail, but actually now it should fail differently. Yes, okay. So now it parses the date properly, but now it's failing again because the value is not being processed correctly. All right. So let's now go to transaction command tests. So interestingly, these are just testing actually the date and value conversions, so nothing interesting there. Count transaction tests. These are checking that the deposit had a transaction, but what we want is where, let's say count controller test, balance tests, deposit test. So here's our deposits, so let's go ahead and create a spend test. And so spend money should reduce account balance. So the difference, so this might look familiar, like, hey, didn't we just write a test to do something like this? Before, though, this test, the spend command, is one level up, and it's actually testing through the controller, making sure that basically it turns a command correctly into a spend. The only way we can ensure, sort of check that the spend command got processed properly is by checking the balance. But we're actually less interested in the fact that it subtracted the right amount. We're more interested that everything got processed correctly. So I might want to eventually change this so that I'm testing, well, what else might I test? I mean, this is basically the best way to validate that the information, that the command got turned into the right thing. But sort of, if I had more sophisticated business logic, it would be in a test that's as close to the account object as I can get. So just like in our deposit test, we create an account, and do a deposit or do a withdraw. It does the right thing. We'll do that here. So account, new, var. So we've got an account, and we say spend. Date time of 2012, 10, 11, 0, 0. And what else does it take? It takes an amount. So let's say he just bought a new Switch video game, so that's going to cost like 56 bucks. So just as a reminder, at this level, we're in the domain where it's working as scaled integers. So if it was $56.95, we'd phrase it that way. And new Switch game. Okay, so we spent the money, and now one of these days IntelliJ will learn how to indent stuff properly. So let's import that. That one. So we're going to assert that the account balance is equal to, and so it should be minus 56.95. We could be a little more, we could do a deposit so we don't go negative on our test. Another thing we could do is we could say, hey, maybe there would be a nice way to sort of start account off at something else. Say, opened up the account at $100, but because we're eventually going to move account to be purely transaction-based, no, I will do those later, thank you. We'll just leave it this way. Okay, so if I run this test, I expect this to fail for the same reasons we've seen before, and it does. Great. So now I can actually implement this thing. So balance minus equal amount, and then transactions. So we'll do the same thing. We're going to do the mutable set. We're going to do the builder version because we want to, and this is a type transaction. Builder. This thing drives me crazy, but whatever. That's Java. So we'll add all the current transactions we have. And then we will add a new transaction. So we've got our date time. This is going to be a spend. I'm having trouble with this as thing because deposit, it works well, but spend sounds weird. I don't know why. Amount and description. Whoops. And I need to do build. Okay. All right. So we have clearly these are almost exactly the same. So once my test passes, I'll refactor this. So let's run the test. And indeed it passes. All right. So let's refactor this because, actually before I do that, let me just run all the unit tests. And those all pass. Great. Okay. I love unit tests that run fast. So let's refactor this. The way I prep this is if I see two things, I mean, in fact, IntelliJ, right now I'm in the community edition. If I had the ultimate edition up, it could actually detect these as being the same. But let's say you don't have that. What I do is I see, well, what's different about these things? Well, really, these are the same. They're just different variable names. I'm not sure which variable name I like better. I like transactions. Let me rename this. So now, really, if we look at these, and this has description, this has source, that's fine. So really, the only difference is this guy. This string here, basically defining what the transaction type was. Eventually, not very far off, these are going to go to enums. Once I start implementing the transaction-based way of figuring out what the current balance is, then I'll do that. But for now, I'll just keep them as strings. So basically, what I want to do is I want to pull out what's in common. Let's see how smart IntelliJ is. So I want to pull this out into a method, which is create or add new transaction. So let's see. So what's it going to do? It's going to take these three parameters, date, time, int, and string. Oh, so it did pull out the source and the amount and the transaction date. Well, let's see. So it's going to replace that. What's the signature change is saying? Oh, that's weird. Yeah, no, that's not what I wanted. Keep original signature. I think it was trying to be too smart. Right, so if we see this now, we see that, so great, it extracted it out, and now deposit just has add new transaction with this information. The problem is that deposit is still hard-coded, and so it's not reusable here. So let's undo that. So what I want to do is I want to pull out the part that I know varies between these. I'll pull these out just into a variable right now. So, and I'll call this action. Sure. And so now if I pull this out into a method, now IntelliJ said, hey, this one looks exactly like the other one. Do you want me to do the same thing? And it's like, yes, please. And so it basically pulled spend right into the refactored method call. Here, this was pulling this out into action was sort of temporary, so I can now inline it back. I might want to reorder the signature. Let's do that. Because I kind of want action to be up higher. Come on. Oops. No, I want to move it. Thank you. No, I want to move it. Darn you. Okay. So now we've got, so let's move spend up. So we've got deposit and spend, and they both look very similar, which is cool. We've got our centralized transactions here, and now if we run all the tests, everything should still work. And great, so all our unit tests work. Let's do a commit. So we basically probably should have committed before. So we basically now have created a generic transaction command that works for both deposit and spend. No, I don't want that. What else we got? Got a test for that. Spend now works at the unit test level. All right, let's commit that. So I have an integration test that uses the mock MVC. So I could go write another one, but just for giggles, let's restart the app. Option R. KidBank application. Hey, you're only supposed to want to run one of those. Hold on, I gotta check my configuration here because it should only allow me to run this one single instance only. I thought that was the default. I think that might be default in 2018.3 of IntelliJ. Okay, so app is running. Refresh the page. Let's deposit $100 that he got as a gift. Cool. And now he wants to spend $35 on Magic the Gathering cards. And wham! Wow. It's kind of cool when it's like, wow, that just worked. No guessing, no nothing. So let's go ahead and write an integration test for the spending, and we would then consider the story done. So let's go ahead and I'm just going to rename this test because we're not doing a lot of tests here, so I don't feel the need to put it into a separate class. So this is account transaction integration test. And so we'll just do a test that submit spend reduces amount. Oops. And spend should reduce amount in account. All right, so we'll do a mock MVC perform. We're going to do a post. We're posting to spend. And so one parameter is our amount. And we're going to spend $87.34. I'm sure there is some method to the way I'm randomly generating these numbers. The date we will put in. And so what I found out yesterday is this is the date that would be coming in from a browser. So it is year, month, day, in terms of all the digits and separated by dashes. So put in 2001, November 12th. And so that's interesting. For deposit, I had description. Wasn't that source? Hold on. Let's go look at account controller and deposit command, which is transaction. Oh, right, because we changed it to description. That means it's description everywhere. And in our account balance here, it's description. Okay, so whether we're doing a deposit or a spend, internally the name is a description, even though we display it as source here. Okay, cool. So we'll go back here. So description, let's say source of money. Nobody will ever see that until it fails. And this is also description. Video game. Nobody will ever see that except for me. So we expect it to be a redirected URL. And then we can do a get and ensure that the balance is now actually I don't know how it would be displayed if it's negative. That's an interesting question because I don't think I have a test for that. My balance test, I have a formatting test, transaction view money format test. I don't know. I don't know what it looks like. Let's write a test for it. So Format negative amount should have minus sign before $sign. That's a business decision. So basically what I'm saying is I want it to be displayed like this, as opposed to it could display like this, which I think looks weird. So we'll assert that transaction view format as money minus $8.95. That should come out as a string of minus 8.95. So let's run our unit tests. Oh, whoops. Let's comment that out. I should put a fail in there. Okay, well, it formatted the way I guess I wanted it, which is nice. You never know how that formatting stuff is going to work. Okay, so we're back to here, so let's uncomment this. Oops. And so we expect it to be minus 87 point, that was in a string, minus $87.43, sorry, 34. So let's now run all the integration tests, which I actually forgot to do before, so let's do that. Where'd all my integration tests go? Darn it. Cool. They all pass. So let's commit. Add an integration test for spending money. Stop that, IntelliJ. And I think I'm ready to push that. All right, and let me go through and see if there's any other obvious refactorings that I want to do. So that looks fine. There's duplication across these. Not terribly concerned about those just yet. So I'm not going to refactor that. We didn't really muck around much with transaction command. So we pulled this stuff out into scaled decimals and into date formatting. Tempted to pull it back into transaction command, but I think I'm going to call it done. So that's it. Let's see, let me look at the story again. So spend money, we can now spend money. So the only other thing is that even though technically this is in reverse chronological order, it's showing really that the deposit is happening later because internally I'm not actually tracking time. For my minimum viable product, that is totally fine because it's pretty rare that that really matters. Like we're not worried about a temporary overdraft or something. Usually he doesn't earn a lot of money, so it's not happening that often, and he's not really spending these big amounts, so this is fine for now. I know I have a story where there's stuff about not selecting the date time sort. I might look into doing more fine-grained timing, but really I'm not going to worry about that. All right, well, I'm going to drag this over to done. and we are done. And that's it for this time. The repository is currently private. I haven't opened it up yet. I haven't decided when I'm going to do that. Probably pretty soon, before or maybe after the next session. All right. And for those of you that tuned in, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Graybeard1970. Appreciate it, and I'll see you next time. Bye.